Now welcome to another lightning response video, and keeping in mind that it was just a few days ago that we celebrated the 12th anniversary of Disney purchasing Lucasfilm, we have this question from Ken Benobi, who asked, "Hey Thor, would you say that Star Wars going from a niche thing to mainstream is the biggest reason why it's lost its identity in a way? I feel like more care was put in even if something wasn't that good. For example, pre-2012 Lucasfilm licensed many EU novels, comics, and some games in various formats. Had any of those failed or been awful, no one would have cared nearly as much as they do now. Sure, we have social media now to amplify our voices and opinions way more than in the heyday of the EU and prequels, but it was there in the mid-2000s post Revenge of the Sith when the steam began to run out in the franchise. As Lucas had stated, Revenge of the Sith was the last film, and the Clone Wars wasn't reaching nearly as many as the live-action films did. It seems like now that it's mainstream, those of us that took the time to appreciate the lore and story are drowned out by new, mainstream audiences that didn't care before and now want it to reflect mainstream forms of entertainment, without truly and fully taking the time to understand and appreciate why Star Wars had the unique generational staying power. Not sure how else to articulate it, pretty sure I've asked this before, but it struck me recently that had projects like The Acolyte been a book or comic, no one would have cared really that it was terrible, especially if it was released pre-2012 Disney purchase. And first of all, I don't think many people today, many fans, take the books or comics of the new canon all that seriously. I think most fans see them as filler stuff that can be, and oftentimes is, retconned on a whim. So why even get all that upset or excited about them to begin with? Not saying none of them are good or worth reading, some certainly have been, or that they always just get ignored, but the way they sometimes do get ignored or changed kind of makes you shrug your shoulders at them every time they potentially do something stupid or even something good. Plus, unlike the EU, which was once where you could kind of say the primary story happened, where big events with big characters were happening, well, not a lot really big or important happens in the books and comics of the new canon. If you're not reading them, you're not usually missing anything important. And to go along with that, I'd say only a small number of people actually do read them, especially in comparison to how many people watch the shows and movies. It is such a small percentage of the fan base that rarely does anything they do, again, good or bad, get a lot of attention or make a lot of noise, if you will. That said, I do think one of the reasons you never really had people getting all that upset with the EU, even though, again, it was using big-time characters and telling big-time stories, was because, yeah, as you point out, social media wasn't quite as big back then, or wasn't a thing at all if you go back far enough in the history of the EU, so obviously it was harder to have your complaints be heard, or hard to sort of linger on them by taking to the internet and sharing your frustration with other people across, again, social media, and perhaps getting stuck in a feedback loop or echo chamber where your initial few frustrations with a book turn into something more because others are harping on them too, or pointing out other things that were bad about the book that you didn't even initially notice. So instead of getting over it fairly quickly by yourself, you're just getting more and more upset about it in a group of people. Another reason why I think some maybe get less upset with the EU, or did get less upset with the EU back in the day, is because it always felt like the intentions were there with new Star Wars books and comics. I mean, in my day, I've read my fair share of EU books and comics that maybe weren't the best thing ever, but I never really got angry at them. Now sure, like I've discussed before, I haven't always wanted to be critical of Star Wars, so that is part of it. I wanted to love all things Star Wars simply because I wanted to love Star Wars, and as I've said, I do get the fans who feel that way about it still today and always want to be positive. Not saying I agree with that stance, but I get it. I get that you just want to enjoy it and that's it. But I think a big part of the reason why I never got all that upset with anything that Lucasfilm was putting out back in the day before Disney, even if I didn't realize it back then or until now, is, again, I did always feel like the intent was there to simply make a good Star Wars story for the sake of the fans and for the sake of Star Wars itself. Even if the story was bad, I could still feel the care, the love, and the passion put into it by the writer or creator or whatever. The stories were always written by someone who loved and understood Star Wars and wanted to, again, add something to Star Wars, not necessarily take something from it for themselves, if that makes sense, or to change something about it to fit their wants and desires. But for whatever reason, the particular book or comic they made just missed the mark and wasn't a very good story. But ever since Disney took over, there is just this sense with much of what they put out, not everything, that it's not just for Star Wars fans. It needs to be for absolutely everybody. And I mean literally everybody and everyone. Which, I get it. If you're Disney and you spent $4 billion on Star Wars, you want to recoup the cost and make some money. I totally understand this is a business, and businesses try to make as many customers as possible in order to maximize profits, and I do not fault them for that exactly. I can't get upset that they're trying to bring in more people and make money. If they don't make money, they're not going to make more Star Wars. Problem is, the way they try to bring in more fans or expand the franchise is kinda asinine. I mean, there's a reason they paid $4 billion for it, and that is because it already has a lot of fans. It already has a lot to be tapped into and mined. Essentially, they bought a gold mine with Star Wars, where you could walk into the mine and see the gold running through the walls. You can see the veins right in the walls. It is easy to tap into it for the most part. But instead of doing that, instead of mining what they have and making a ton of money off of it, they, like all big corporations, they want to go even bigger. Instead of just taking what they have, running with it, and again, making a ton of money, they want to know how to or to squeeze more gold and profits out of it than they already were going to, which should have been enough in theory. But again, corporations always need to try to make the most money. They do have a fiduciary responsibility to their shareholders, and in a way, I think that is what holds them back. It's kind of ironic that the more you try to please the shareholders, the more you're likely not going to please the fans, and in the long run, the shareholders are going to get less money from those fans, if you will. Anyway, I think another issue here is that many at Lucasfilm see Star Wars as something that needs to be fixed because it doesn't appeal to more groups of people or to particular groups of people as much as it appeals to other groups. For example, we know more men than women love and watch Star Wars. We've even heard that from the boss herself. Kathleen Kennedy has mentioned how hard it is to be a female in Star Wars because the men are bad or something. And thus, with the men being bad and there being this imbalance, it is something that needs to be corrected. It is something that needs to be fixed. We can't have a franchise where more men like it than women. Though, ironically, if it became flipped one day down the road, if there were far more female fans than male fans, I don't think they would have a problem with that. Another issue is that maybe they don't like, maybe some at Lucasfilm, or that they bring in to make shows or movies or write books and comics, whatever it might be, they don't like some of the ideals Star Wars upholds, or used to uphold, or they've found new ones to inject that are more important, especially in these modern times. And thus, certain elements about what it used to be need to be changed or torn down to make room for new beliefs, like maybe the Jedi need to be changed because they're just too damn good. Who can uphold those kind of standards? Who can be or should be more selfless than selfish? That's just a crazy idea. But anyway, you change things and then the fans get upset because it's not just an author coming in trying to do something unique for Star Wars, it's someone coming in trying to change the very foundation of Star Wars because they have an issue with you for liking it that way. And even though they claim making it this new way, making it for more modern audiences is better somehow, what doesn't add up is that audiences aren't there. The popularity of Star Wars seems to be decreasing, despite their efforts to make it more inclusive and for more people. And I think the reason for that is rather simple, which is that there is something inherently special about Star Wars as it is or as it was. Something that attracts people or it just works. It could be simply tapping into the hero's journey, it could be the setting, it could be a lot of things, or more than likely it's a combination of a lot of things. But in theory, you shouldn't have to try that hard with Star Wars. Again, it's like a gold mine. There is plenty there to tap into if you want to tell a good story. It's not complicated. Just pick up a pick or a shovel and start digging in. But they don't want to do that. They want it to be what they want it to be. And so instead of taking the easy route and giving us a Darth Plagueis show, they decide to go the hard route and give us the Acolyte in order to, I assume, appeal to even more people. And we're simply making a Plagueis show based off the James Luceno novel, which is fantastic, where that would have no doubt got pretty much every Star Wars fan excited. They went with the Acolyte and tried to make a point about the Jedi being, well, not so good, and here we are. Basically, you can't change Star Wars to make it more appealing to more people, because the more you change it, the more you're turning it into something different. The more it's not Star Wars anymore. The more the recipe is changed, the more the end result is not something that everybody who used to enjoy it is going to continue to enjoy. And I know I sound like a gatekeeper right now, but again, I believe there is something special about Star Wars that pretty much anybody nowadays could get into and still enjoy as it was. And if you don't like what it was, well then, simply put, you're probably not even going to like what changes they make to it. You're probably just someone who doesn't enjoy Star Wars, which is absolutely fine. I'm simply saying Star Wars appeals to large numbers of people as it is or as it was, and if it's not your thing, no changes made to it are going to make it something you enjoy, unless those changes are so radical it's not that thing anymore. And I'm not saying you can't put more female characters in it. I'm not saying that at all, or minorities, or whatever else it might be. But the more that becomes the focus, the more you focus on things external to Star Wars, the less it becomes about Star Wars, and go figure, the less you appeal to Star Wars fans. But anyway, I think that's where I'll call it. I don't even know if I'm making sense in this one. It's Sunday morning. What do you expect out of me? But anyway, take to the comments below. Tell me what you think about anything I had to say here, or answer the question yourself. What is it about Star Wars today that seems to anger more people? Is it just social media? Is it the fact that it seems like they don't care about Star Wars and want to change it into something else? Or you can always ask a question for a future lightning response video. All you got to do, you start your comment off with "Hey Thor," and then you ask away, and perhaps I get to it in a future video. Whatever the case may be though, leave a comment below. Let's talk some Star Wars. And until next time, thanks for watching.